Okay, so hopefully you've given this a try. When I start again, starting with that shape, okay, so that sine shape without a vertical reflection should look like this. My amplitude is 1/2. My period, the b value is still 1, so I have a period of 2 pi. I do have a phase shift. Keep in mind that that phase shift is actually going to shift it to the left. So that's negative direction. Okay. I don't have a vertical shift because I don't have a d value. That means that my midline is at y equals 0. My domain is still negative infinity to infinity. And my range, if I start at the midline of 0 and I go up 1/2 and down 1/2, that makes my range negative 1/2 to 1/2. Now, if I'm phase shifting to the left, I need to give myself a little bit of space to the left of that y-axis. So I want to make sure that I give myself some room. Okay, so if I'm going to shift to the left pi over 4, that means that my period is going to start there, right? And my period is 2 pi. It's a length of 2 pi. So again, that interval, when I divide it into fourths, gives me pi over 2. So each interval should be adding pi over 2. So if I start with negative pi over 4 and I add pi over 2, the first thing I have to do is get that common denominator. So instead of pi over 2, I'm going to change that to 2 pi over 4. So it'll have the same denominator. When I add those together, I get pi over 4 as my next piece of the interval. I'm going to keep going, pi over 4 plus, I'm going to keep adding that interval of 2 pi over 4. I may as well leave it as 2 pi over 4 so that we keep that common denominator. So now I have pi over 4 plus 2 pi over 4 to get 3 pi over 4. I'm going to take 3 pi over 4, add 2 pi over 4 again, right? That 2 pi over 4, that's the interval that we're going to add every time. So that's 5 pi over 4. And I'm going to check and see, do I have the right number of intervals yet? 1, 2, 3. No, not yet, right? I need 4 of those intervals. So 5 pi over 4 plus that same interval length every time gives me 7 pi over 4. And I kind of didn't give myself enough room the way I spaced this, so I'm going to just try to extend that y-axis a little bit longer. Okay. So do I have enough intervals now? 1, 2, 3, 4. I do. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to draw in my amplitude. So keeping in mind that I might go up 1/2 and then to 1, down 1/2, down to 1. And I am going to draw in that shape. So I'm going to start on the midline. And remember, I'm shifted horizontally. I have that phase shift. So I'm not starting on the y-axis. And then I'm going up to the maximum, which is 1/2, down to the midline, down to the minimum, back up to the midline. And so here is my graph.